The invitation sat on Melissa Chen's kitchen counter like a small guillotine, cream-colored cardstock with gold-embossed lettering announcing the annual Metropolitan Leadership Gala. Her husband's name, Alexander Chen, Chief Executive Officer, Chen Global Enterprises, appeared prominently in the list of platinum sponsors. Her own name was nowhere to be found. "You're not going." Alexander's voice came from behind her, flat and final. He stood in the doorway of their penthouse kitchen, already dressed in his tuxedo for the evening, looking every inch the billionaire tech mogul the world believed him to be. Melissa's hand moved instinctively to her swollen belly, 7 months pregnant and showing despite the flowing tunic she wore. "Alex, this is the biggest event of the year. The governor will be there, half the state legislature, every business leader in the tri-state area. How will it look if your wife doesn't attend? It will look like you're home resting, as you should be." He adjusted his cufflinks with practiced precision, the same way he did everything, controlled, calculated, designed for maximum efficiency. "Dr. Morrison said you should be avoiding stress and large crowds. Dr. Morrison said I should avoid unnecessary stress. He didn't confine me to house arrest." Alexander's jaw tightened, the only sign that her defiance irritated him. "Melissa, I've already made the decision. You're not going to the gala, and that's final. I need to focus on networking tonight without worrying about whether you're tired or uncomfortable or drawing attention." Drawing attention. There it was, the real reason wrapped in false concern. Melissa had put on 40 pounds with this pregnancy, her face fuller, her movements slower. She wasn't the sleek, polished accessory Alexander preferred to display at these events anymore. "I see. So you're embarrassed to be seen with me. Don't be dramatic. I'm being practical." He glanced at his Rolex, a $75,000 piece that cost more than most people's annual salary. "I have a car waiting downstairs. I'll be back late, probably after midnight. There's dinner in the refrigerator if you're hungry." He left without kissing her goodbye, without a second glance, without acknowledging that he was abandoning his pregnant wife on what should have been their evening together. Melissa stood alone in the kitchen of their $12 million penthouse, floor-to-ceiling windows offering a view of the city that suddenly felt like a prison. She looked down at her belly, where their daughter kicked with what felt like protest. "I know, baby girl," she whispered. "I know." Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number, followed by a photo that made her blood run cold. It was Alexander. At the gala. His arm around a woman Melissa recognized immediately, Natasha Volkov, the 26-year-old communications director he'd hired 3 months ago. Blonde, tall, wearing a dress that probably cost what Melissa's Honda had cost before Alexander insisted she drive the Tesla he'd bought her. The message below the photo read, "Thanks for staying home, fatty. Alex and I have important networking to do. Don't wait up." Melissa sank into one of the kitchen chairs, her hands shaking. She'd suspected for weeks, the late nights, the new cologne, the way Alexander had stopped touching her altogether once her pregnancy became visible. But suspecting and knowing were different things. Another text arrived, this time from her best friend Rebecca. "Melissa, I'm at the gala. Alex just introduced Natasha as his invaluable right hand. They're practically glued together. Where are you?" Before Melissa could respond, her phone rang. The caller ID showed a number she hadn't dialed in 2 years, hadn't spoken to in longer than that because Alexander had made it very clear he didn't appreciate her mother's interference in their marriage. She answered on the 3rd ring. "Mom?" "Melissa Catherine Mitchell." Her mother's voice came through the line with the same commanding authority that had served her through 20 years in the Senate. "Why am I looking at live coverage of the Metropolitan Leadership Gala, and why is your husband introducing some bottle blonde as his colleague while you're nowhere to be seen?" "He didn't want me to come. He said I should rest." The silence that followed was so profound that Melissa could hear her own heartbeat. When Senator Victoria Mitchell spoke again, her voice had dropped to that dangerous quiet that made congressional opponents nervous. "He banned you from the Metropolitan Leadership Gala. The event being held at the Mitchell Convention Center that I own. The event where I'm the keynote speaker tonight. The event where every major political figure in this state owes me at least one significant favor. Melissa felt something shift in her chest. I didn't know you owned the venue. Alexander handled all the details. I'm sure he did. And I'm quite sure he has no idea who he's been making a fool of tonight. Another pause. Melissa, how long has this been going on? The affair, the isolation, the control? Mom, it's complicated. It's not complicated. It's abuse. And it ends tonight. Victoria's voice sharpened with purpose. I'm sending a car for you. You're coming to this gala, and when you arrive, Alexander Chin is going to learn exactly what happens when someone underestimates a Mitchell woman. Mom, I can't just show up. Everyone will see you walking on the arm of Senator Victoria Mitchell, looking absolutely radiant despite being 7 months pregnant with your cheating husband's child. They'll see the venue owner acknowledge her daughter publicly for the first time in 2 years. And they'll draw their own conclusions about where the real power in your marriage lies. Melissa looked down at her simple tunic and leggings, at her bare face and hair pulled back in a messy bun. I'm not dressed for a gala. You will be. I'm sending my stylist with the car. 1 hour, Melissa. We're going to show the world who you really are. After her mother hung up, Melissa sat in the stillness of her kitchen and felt something she hadn't experienced in the 2 years since marrying Alexander Chen. Not fear, not uncertainty, but a cold, crystallizing fury that felt remarkably like power. She'd hidden from her family name for so long, desperate to be loved for herself rather than her mother's political connections. She'd let Alexander convince her that being Victoria Mitchell's daughter was something to downplay, something that made her less authentic. But Alexander had forgotten something crucial. Or perhaps he'd never known it in the first place. The Mitchell family didn't build their influence through weakness. They built it through strategic patience, careful observation, and the absolute certainty that underestimating them was the last mistake anyone ever made. Melissa pulled up her phone and scrolled through her contacts to a number she'd saved years ago but never called. James Patterson, her mother's longtime chief of staff and the man who'd taught Melissa everything she knew about political warfare before she'd run away to marry a tech billionaire. He answered on the first ring. Melissa Mitchell. I was wondering when you'd call. James, I need everything you have on Alexander Chen. Every business deal, every contract, every political connection he's been cultivating. And I need to know which ones run through my mother's network without him realizing it. I've been maintaining that file for 2 years, waiting for you to ask. Give me 20 minutes. As Melissa ended the call, she caught sight of her reflection in the kitchen's polished surfaces. Pregnant, betrayed, abandoned at a gala by a husband who thought her powerless. Alexander Chen had made a fatal miscalculation tonight. He'd humiliated the daughter of the most powerful senator in the state while standing in a venue owned by that senator, surrounded by politicians whose careers Victoria Mitchell could make or break with a single phone call. The baby kicked hard against Melissa's ribs, as if sensing that everything was about to change. Hold on, sweetheart, Melissa whispered, her hand protective over her belly. Mommy's about to show Daddy exactly what happens when you underestimate a Mitchell. The stylist Victoria Mitchell sent was a miracle worker named Claudia who took one look at Melissa's swollen ankles and red-rimmed eyes and immediately went to work. Senator Mitchell told me everything, Claudia said, already pulling garment bags from the sleek black SUV that had pulled up to the penthouse building. We're going to make you look so devastatingly beautiful that your husband will choke on his champagne when you walk in. Melissa stood in her bedroom, the one she'd shared with Alexander before he'd moved into the guest suite 3 weeks ago, claiming her pregnancy insomnia kept him awake, and watched Claudia transform the space into a styling station. I'm 7 months pregnant. There's only so much we can work with. Claudia fixed her with a look. Honey, pregnant women are gorgeous. The glow, the curves, the whole Madonna thing, it's powerful. We're not hiding anything. We're celebrating it while making it clear that you're not some sad housewife waiting at home. The dress Claudia pulled from the garment bag made Melissa's breath catch. Midnight blue silk that draped rather than clung, with strategic gathering that would emphasize her pregnancy rather than hide it. The neckline was elegant, sophisticated, showing just enough to remind everyone that she was still a woman underneath the baby bump. "This is Valentino. Your mother had it custom made for you 2 weeks ago." 2 weeks ago? Mom knew about tonight 2 weeks ago? Claudia smiled as she began working on Melissa's hair. "Senator Mitchell knows about everything, sweetie. She's been watching your marriage fall apart from afar, giving you space to work it out, but keeping ammunition loaded in case you needed it." As Claudia worked, Melissa's phone buzzed with an encrypted email from James Patterson. The subject line read, "Alexander Chen, complete dossier." She opened it and began reading, her fury crystallizing into something colder and more focused with every paragraph. Alexander Chen's business empire, Chen Global Enterprises, valued at $2.3 billion, looked impressive on paper. But James's research revealed the scaffolding underneath. Every major government contract Alexander had secured in the past 5 years had come through connections to Victoria Mitchell's network. The tech initiative partnerships, the cybersecurity consulting deals, the lucrative Defense Department contracts, all of them had been facilitated by senators, representatives, and government officials who owed Victoria favors. Alexander had built his fortune on Melissa's family name while simultaneously making her feel worthless for having it. The file included something else, a complete dossier on Natasha Volkov. Not just a communications director, a former escort-turned-corporate climber who'd been systematically targeting wealthy married men for 3 years. She'd been married twice, both times to men she'd met while they were still married to other women. Both previous marriages had ended in expensive divorces that left Natasha substantially wealthier. "He has no idea what he's dealing with, does he?" Melissa murmured, still reading. Claudia paused in her work. "The mistress or your mother?" "Either of them." By the time Claudia finished, Melissa barely recognized herself. Her dark hair was swept up in an elegant chignon, with a few strategic tendrils framing her face. Her makeup was flawless but natural, emphasizing her features rather than masking them. The dress fit perfectly, the midnight blue making her skin glow. But it was her expression that had changed most. The uncertainty and self-doubt she'd carried for months were gone, replaced by something that looked remarkably like her mother's senatorial presence. "There," Claudia said with satisfaction. "Now you look like Senator Mitchell's daughter." A knock at the door announced the arrival of Marcus Williams, her mother's head of security. 6'4", former Secret Service, he'd been protecting Victoria Mitchell for a decade. "Miss Mitchell," he said formally. "Your mother is waiting at the venue. I'm to escort you safely." As Melissa gathered her clutch and wrap, she caught sight of the family photo on her nightstand. Her wedding day, 2 years ago. She'd been radiant then too, but in a different way, naive, hopeful, believing that love and ambition could coexist peacefully. Alexander had been charming that day, whispering promises about building a life together, about partnership and respect. She believed every word. She turned the photo face down and walked toward the door. The ride to the Mitchell Convention Center took 20 minutes through downtown traffic. Marcus drove with practiced efficiency while Melissa reviewed the rest of James's dossier on her phone. Alexander's affair with Natasha had begun 4 months ago, shortly after Melissa announced her pregnancy. The hotel receipts, the private jet usage, the jewelry purchases, all documented, all charged to Chen Global Enterprises accounts, all technically corporate fraud if one wanted to make that argument. But it was the political connections that interested Melissa most. Alexander had 3 major contract renewals coming up in the next 6 months, all with government agencies, all requiring approval from oversight committees where Victoria Mitchell wielded significant influence. He'd built his empire on connections he'd gained through marriage to her. Now he was about to discover what happened when those connections were severed. "We're here," Marcus said, pulling up to the convention center's VIP entrance. The Mitchell Convention Center occupied 4 city blocks in the heart of downtown, a gleaming testament to her family's long history in state politics. Her grandfather had been governor. Her mother had built a Senate career on infrastructure and development. The convention center bore their name not as vanity, but as acknowledgement of 40 years of public service. Alexander had held his gala here without apparently realizing who owned the venue. Marcus came around to open her door, offering his arm as Melissa stepped onto the red carpet. Camera flashes immediately started popping. The press was always interested in Senator Mitchell's events. "Miss Mitchell. Over here." "Melissa, where's your husband? Is it true you've been estranged from your mother?" Marcus guided her smoothly through the gauntlet, his presence making it clear that she was under protection. Through the glass doors, Melissa could see the gala in full swing, 500 of the state's most powerful people, all dressed in their finest, all networking and schmoozing and making deals that would shape policy for years to come. And somewhere in that crowd was Alexander, with his arm around a woman who had no idea what was about to hit her. Victoria Mitchell appeared in the lobby, resplendent in an emerald gown that commanded attention without being ostentatious. At 62, she carried herself with the authority of someone who'd won more political battles than most people fought in a lifetime. "Melissa." Her mother's voice was warm, but her eyes were cold with fury. "You look absolutely beautiful." "Mom." Melissa felt tears threaten and blinked them back. "Thank you for, don't thank me yet." Victoria took her daughter's arm, her grip firm and steadying. "We're about to walk into that ballroom together, and when we do, everyone in this room is going to understand exactly what it means to disrespect a Mitchell woman." Through the ballroom doors, Melissa could hear the band playing, glasses clinking, the hum of conversation that came with this kind of event. Her heart was pounding, but not with fear. With anticipation. "Are you ready?" Victoria asked. Melissa thought about Alexander's casual cruelty that morning, about Natasha's mocking text, about 2 years of slowly being made to feel worthless in her own marriage. "I'm ready." The ballroom doors opened, and mother and daughter stepped into the light together. The moment Melissa and Victoria Mitchell entered the ballroom, conversations faltered like dominoes falling. Heads turned. Whispers rippled outward in waves. The band continued playing, but even the musicians seemed to lose their rhythm for half a beat. Alexander Chen stood near the bar, Natasha Volkov pressed against his side, both of them mid-laugh at something a state legislator had said. Melissa watched her husband's face drain of color as he registered her presence, his champagne glass frozen halfway to his lips. Victoria Mitchell didn't pause. She walked directly into the center of the ballroom with Melissa on her arm, moving with the confidence of someone who owned every square inch of the space, because she literally did. "Senator Mitchell." Governor Harrison materialized from the crowd, his smile broad and political. "What a wonderful surprise. We weren't expecting to see you until the keynote." "Governor." Victoria's smile was equally calculated. "I thought I'd join the festivities a bit early tonight. I wanted to make sure everyone had a chance to meet my daughter, Melissa. I don't believe she's attended many events since her marriage." The governor's eyes widened slightly as he made the connection. "Your daughter." "Of course. Mrs. Chen, it's a pleasure." Melissa shook his hand, feeling the weight of attention pressing down from all sides. Across the room, she could see Alexander making his way toward them, Natasha trailing behind like she wasn't sure whether to follow or flee. "Mrs. Chen," the governor continued, his gaze dropping to her belly, "congratulations on your pregnancy." "What are you due?" 2 months. Melissa's voice came out steadier than she felt. "It's a girl." "How wonderful." The governor's smile turned calculating. He was already processing the implications of Victoria Mitchell's daughter appearing publicly at an event her husband had apparently attended without her. "Your husband must be thrilled." "I'm sure he is," Victoria interjected smoothly. "Though Alexander seems to have forgotten to mention that tonight's event was being held in my facility. I own the Mitchell Convention Center, you see. Have for nearly 20 years. The governor's expression flickered, understanding, surprise, the rapid recalculation of political alliances that came naturally to men in his position. "Is that so?" "Well, it's a magnificent venue, Senator." Alexander reached them, his face a careful mask of composure that didn't quite hide the panic in his eyes. "Melissa. What a surprise. I thought you were resting at home." "Did you?" Victoria's voice could have cut glass. How thoughtful of you to be concerned about my daughter's rest. Though I have to wonder why you'd hold such an important event without ensuring she could attend comfortably. Senator Mitchell. Alexander's tone shifted to the smooth corporate charm he used in negotiations. I didn't realize you'd be in attendance tonight. What an honor. Is it? An honor? Victoria tilted her head slightly. You've been using my venue for your corporate events for 2 years, Alexander. You've never once acknowledged that your wife's mother owns the building. I've found that curious. The crowd around them had grown, people drawn by the unmistakable tension. Melissa could see faces she recognized from the society pages, from business sections, from political coverage. Everyone who mattered in the state was witnessing this confrontation. Natasha appeared at Alexander's elbow, her hand possessively on his arm. Up close, Melissa could see the expensive dress, the professional makeup, the calculated beauty of someone who'd made a career out of her appearance. Alexander, Natasha said, her accent thick with affected sophistication, the congressman is asking for you. Victoria's gaze shifted to Natasha like a predator spotting prey. And you are? Natasha Volkov. I'm Mr. Chen's communications director. How nice. Victoria's smile didn't reach her eyes. Tell me, Ms. Volkov, how long have you been in communications? Your resume suggests you've had quite a varied career path. Natasha's confidence flickered. I've worked in various industries, Senator. I believe diverse experience makes me more effective. I'm sure it does. Victoria's tone made it clear she knew exactly what kind of diverse experience Natasha had accumulated. Though I have to say, the optics of a married man arriving at a gala with his young female employee while his pregnant wife stays home, well, it's the sort of thing that makes people talk, doesn't it? Alexander's jaw tightened. Senator Mitchell, if I could have a word in private, by all means. Victoria gestured toward a quieter corner of the ballroom. Melissa, why don't you stay here with the governor? I'm sure you two have much to discuss about the infrastructure bill coming up for vote. As Victoria and Alexander moved away, the governor leaned toward Melissa with genuine curiosity. I have to admit, Mrs. Chen, I had no idea you were Senator Mitchell's daughter. Your husband never mentioned it. No, Melissa said quietly, watching Alexander's increasingly agitated gestures across the room. He preferred people not know about my family connections. Said he wanted to succeed on his own merit. Interesting philosophy. The governor's tone suggested he understood exactly what kind of merit Alexander had actually been trading on. Though I noticed Chen Global has been very successful with government contracts in recent years. Melissa met his gaze directly. All facilitated through my mother's network, Governor. Every single one. Alexander built his empire on Mitchell family connections while convincing me I should be ashamed of having them. The governor's eyebrows rose. Well, that is interesting. Across the room, Victoria and Alexander's conversation was growing heated. Melissa couldn't hear the words, but she could see Alexander's face reddening, his hands gesturing sharply. Rebecca appeared at Melissa's side, her expression a mixture of shock and savage satisfaction. Holy shit, Melissa. You actually came. And you brought your mother. This is the most incredible thing I've ever witnessed. It's not over yet, Melissa murmured. Natasha had drifted toward a cluster of young tech executives, clearly trying to network her way into new opportunities now that her current position might be compromised. Melissa watched her laugh at someone's joke, touch a man's arm with practiced flirtation, operate with the smooth efficiency of someone who'd done this many times before. She has no idea what's coming, does she? Rebecca asked. Neither of them do. Victoria returned, her expression serene but her eyes blazing with controlled fury. Melissa, darling, why don't we step up to the podium? I believe it's time for my keynote address. Mom, are you sure? Absolutely sure. Victoria took her daughter's arm again. Alexander has just learned that every major contract Chen Global Enterprises holds with state agencies comes through committees I either chair or heavily influence. He's processing that information now. As they made their way to the stage at the front of the ballroom, Melissa could see Alexander standing frozen near the bar, his face ashen. Natasha had noticed his distress and was making her way back toward him, confusion evident in her expression. The MC for the evening, a news anchor Melissa recognized from local television, greeted them at the stage stairs. "Senator Mitchell, we're ready for you whenever you are." "Thank you, David." Victoria turned to Melissa. "Stand beside me. I want everyone to see you." The lights dimmed, and a spotlight illuminated the stage. Victoria stepped up to the podium with the ease of someone who'd delivered thousands of speeches, and Melissa stood slightly behind her, visible but not central, the perfect position to observe while being observed. "Good evening," Victoria began, her voice carrying across the suddenly silent ballroom. "Thank you all for attending the annual Metropolitan Leadership Gala, held here at the Mitchell Convention Center." She paused, letting the venue name register. Several people in the crowd shifted, clearly making connections they hadn't made before. "For those who don't know, this facility has been in my family for nearly 20 years. My father broke ground on it during his final term as governor, and I've maintained it as a space for civic engagement and community building. Every major political event in this state has passed through these halls. Every significant policy discussion has happened within these walls." Victoria's gaze swept the room, landing briefly on Alexander before moving on. "I'm proud of the legacy this center represents. But I'm even more proud of something else, my daughter, Melissa Mitchell-Chen, who stands beside me tonight." Melissa felt hundreds of eyes turn toward her, felt the weight of scrutiny and speculation. She kept her spine straight, her hand resting on her belly, her expression calm despite her racing heart. "Melissa has always been private about our family connection," Victoria continued. "She married for love 2 years ago, choosing a man she believed shared her values of partnership and respect. She stepped back from public life because she wanted to build something authentic, something that wasn't about political connections or family influence." The subtext was unmistakable. Everyone in the room was now looking at Alexander, who stood near the bar with Natasha still clinging to his arm, both of them looking increasingly uncomfortable. "But tonight," Victoria said, her voice hardening slightly, "I want to publicly acknowledge my daughter and my soon-to-be granddaughter. Because family, real family, built on loyalty and love, matters more than any business deal or political alliance." She turned to look directly at Alexander. "And anyone who forgets that, anyone who takes family for granted or treats it as disposable, will discover that the Mitchell family protects our own. Completely. Ruthlessly. Without hesitation." The silence in the ballroom was absolute. Melissa could hear her own breathing, could feel her baby moving against her ribs as if responding to the tension. "Now," Victoria said, her tone lightening as she returned her attention to the broader audience, "let's discuss the infrastructure initiatives that will shape our state's future." As Victoria launched into her prepared remarks about transportation funding and development zones, Melissa watched the crowd's reaction. Some people were still staring at her, calculating the implications of what Victoria had just revealed. Others were watching Alexander, whose career prospects had just been publicly put on notice. And a few, the smartest ones, Melissa thought, were already moving away from Alexander and Natasha, creating visible distance from what was clearly about to become a political and social disaster. Rebecca appeared at the base of the stage stairs, mouthing words Melissa could read clearly, "He's leaving." Melissa looked toward the ballroom exit and saw Alexander making his way through the crowd with forced casualness, Natasha trailing behind him. He was trying to appear unhurried, like he had somewhere else to be rather than fleeing the scene of his humiliation. But before he could reach the door, Marcus Williams materialized in his path. The security chief didn't touch Alexander, didn't threaten him, just stood there with the solid presence of someone who'd stopped more important people than a tech billionaire having a bad night. "Mr. Chen," Marcus said, his voice carrying across the room and the gap between Victoria's sentences. "Senator Mitchell would like a word before you leave. She's arranged a private meeting room." It wasn't a request. Alexander's face went through several interesting expressions before settling on forced compliance. "Of course. I'd be happy to speak with the senator. As Victoria concluded her remarks to thunderous applause, Melissa descended from the stage and made her way toward the private meeting room where her mother was clearly about to destroy her husband's career. The reckoning had arrived, and Melissa intended to witness every moment of it. The private meeting room was actually Victoria Mitchell's personal office within the convention center, a space she designed specifically for the kind of delicate negotiations that happen in the margins of public events. Mahogany furniture, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, and soundproofing that ensured complete privacy. Alexander stood near the windows, his posture rigid with barely controlled fury. Natasha perched on one of the leather chairs, her earlier confidence replaced by obvious nervousness. She'd clearly realized that her position as communications director didn't grant her immunity from whatever was about to happen. Melissa entered with Victoria, Marcus Williams stationed discreetly near the door. James Patterson was already there, laptop open, surrounded by file folders that represented 2 years of careful documentation. "Senator Mitchell," Alexander began, his voice tight, "I don't appreciate being summoned like some. Sit down, Alexander." Victoria's voice was pleasant but carried absolute authority. "We have several items to discuss, and I'd prefer to handle this efficiently." Alexander's jaw clenched, but he sat. Natasha shifted in her chair, looking like she wanted to disappear. Victoria settled behind her desk with the ease of someone who'd conducted thousands of difficult conversations. "Let me be very clear about the situation you currently find yourself in. Chin Global Enterprises holds 7 major government contracts worth approximately $340 million in annual revenue. Every single one of those contracts was secured through connections to my political network." She opened a folder and slid it across the desk toward Alexander. "Here's a complete breakdown. The cybersecurity contract with the Department of Defense, that came through Senator Morrison, who owed me 3 favors from the infrastructure bill. The consulting deal with Homeland Security, that was Congressman Phillips, who needed my support for his education initiative. The State Technology Modernization Project, Governor Harrison, who required my votes on his environmental policy." Alexander's face had gone pale. Those contracts were awarded based on merit, on Chin Global's technical capabilities." "Of course they were," Victoria interrupted smoothly. "I wouldn't have recommended your company if you weren't competent." "But competence isn't enough in government contracting, Alexander. There are dozens of competent firms. What got you in the room, what got you considered at all, was your marriage to my daughter." She let that sink in for a moment before continuing. "All of those contracts come up for renewal in the next 6 months. Renewals that will require approval from oversight committees where I wield considerable influence. Renewals that suddenly seem much less certain now that I've discovered how you've been treating my daughter. Senator Mitchell, I understand you're upset about Melissa, but our personal issues shouldn't affect business relationships, shouldn't they?" Victoria's smile was sharp as a knife. "You certainly had no problem mixing personal and business when it benefited you. You used your marriage to my daughter to build your company. You leveraged our family name while simultaneously making Melissa feel worthless for having it. You isolated her from her family and friends, controlled her access to her own mother, all while parasitically feeding off the connections that marriage provided." She leaned forward slightly. "So yes, Alexander, your personal issues are absolutely affecting your business relationships. Because every person you've schmoozed at these events, every politician you've courted, every contract you've secured, all of it has been built on a foundation that you just publicly destroyed." James Patterson cleared his throat. "If I may, Senator." He turned to his laptop. "I've prepared a comprehensive analysis of Chin Global's dependency on government contracts. Without those $340 million in annual revenue, the company's current debt load becomes unsustainable within 18 months. You'd be forced to lay off approximately 60% of your workforce, sell off assets, possibly declare bankruptcy." Alexander shot to his feet. "This is extortion. You can't threaten to destroy my company because I'm having marital problems." "I'm not destroying anything," Victoria replied calmly. "I'm simply withdrawing my political support from a man who abandoned my pregnant daughter at a gala." If that has business consequences, well, that's unfortunate but hardly my concern. Natasha spoke for the first time, her voice small. Perhaps I should step outside. No, Ms. Volkov, please stay. Victoria's attention shifted to her. You're very much part of this conversation. She opened another folder. Natasha Volkov, formerly Natasha Petrov, formerly Natasha Kozlov. 3 marriages, 3 expensive divorces, all to men you met while they were still married to other women. You've been married to a real estate developer, an investment banker, and a pharmaceutical executive. Each marriage lasted between 18 and 24 months. Each divorce settlement was sealed, but my investigators estimate you've collected approximately $4.5 million total. Natasha's face went white. How did you? I'm a United States Senator, Ms. Volkov. I have access to information most people don't. Victoria's expression remained pleasant, almost friendly. Your pattern is quite consistent. Identify a wealthy married man, position yourself as his employee or business associate, seduce him during a vulnerable period, often when his wife is pregnant or dealing with a family crisis, encourage him to leave his wife, marry him yourself, then divorce him within 2 years and move on to the next target. She paused, letting the silence stretch. Alexander is simply your latest mark. And based on the timeline, I'd estimate you have another 14 months before you'd plan to initiate your own divorce proceedings. Alexander turned to stare at Natasha, understanding dawning in his expression. Is this true? Were you planning to divorce me? Natasha's mask of sophistication had completely crumbled. Alexander, I love you, you love his bank account, Victoria corrected. You're a professional, Ms. Volkov, and you're quite good at what you do. But you made one critical error this time. What error? You targeted the wrong family. Victoria stood, her full senatorial presence filling the room. Alexander Chen's fortune was built on Mitchell family connections. If I withdraw those connections, his wealth evaporates. Which means your eventual divorce settlement evaporates with it. You've just wasted 4 months seducing a man who's about to become significantly less wealthy. The silence that followed was deafening. Alexander sank back into his chair, his face ashen as he processed the full scope of his miscalculation. Natasha looked like she might be sick. Melissa, who'd been standing quietly by the window watching this unfold, finally spoke. I want a divorce, Alexander. Her husband looked up at her, something that might have been regret flickering across his face. Melissa, if we could just talk about this privately, we're well past privacy. Melissa moved to stand beside her mother, her hand resting on her pregnant belly. You spent 2 years making me feel worthless, isolating me from my family, convincing me that my connections to my mother were something shameful. You built your entire fortune on those connections while simultaneously destroying my sense of self-worth. She gestured toward Natasha. And then you humiliated me publicly by bringing your mistress to an event I should have attended with you, in a venue my family owns, in front of people whose political support depends on my mother's goodwill. Alexander's hands clenched. I made mistakes. I know that. But we have a child to think about. Our child will be raised by a mother who knows her worth, Melissa interrupted. A mother who won't teach her that a woman's value depends on how small she makes herself to accommodate a man's ego. A mother who's part of a family that's been shaping state policy for 3 generations. Victoria pulled out another document. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to sign divorce papers that Melissa's attorneys will deliver tomorrow. The settlement will be generous to her, half of everything you acquired during the marriage, plus child support calculated at the highest allowable rate. That's not fair. I built Chen Global before we married, did you? James interjected. Because according to our analysis, your company was worth $200 million when you married Melissa and is now valued at $2.3 billion. That growth of $2.1 billion happened entirely during your marriage, using connections provided through your wife's family. Legally speaking, Melissa has a very strong claim to half of that growth. Victoria continued smoothly. You'll also sign a non-disparagement agreement. No interviews about the marriage, no social media posts, no public statements that paint yourself as a victim or Melissa as anything other than the woman you were fortunate enough to marry. And if I refuse? Then every government contract Chen Global holds will face intense scrutiny from oversight committees. Audits will be ordered. Questions will be raised about how exactly a relatively small tech firm managed to secure such lucrative deals. Investigators will be very interested in your expense accounts, particularly the corporate funds you've been using to finance your affair with Ms. Volkov. Alexander looked at Natasha, then back at Victoria. This is blackmail. This is consequences, Victoria replied. You forgot who my daughter was. You forgot that the Mitchell family didn't build our influence by being forgiving toward people who hurt us. You forgot that every advantage you've enjoyed came through a connection you were actively destroying. She stood, signaling the end of the meeting. You have 24 hours to decide. Sign the divorce papers and accept the settlement terms, or fight us and watch everything you've built disappear. Those are your only options. Marcus opened the door, a clear dismissal. Alexander rose stiffly, his earlier confidence completely shattered. Natasha followed him, her professional composure in tatters. At the doorway, Alexander turned back. Melissa, please. We can work this out. For the baby's sake. Melissa met his gaze steadily. The baby's sake is exactly why I'm doing this. She deserves better than watching her mother accept crumbs from a man who sees her as disposable. After they left, Victoria turned to her daughter. Are you all right? Melissa was quiet for a long moment. I should feel something, shouldn't I? Sadness, regret, something. But all I feel is relieved. That's what freedom feels like, Victoria said gently. The absence of constant diminishment. Through the office windows, they could see the gala continuing below, 500 people networking and schmoozing, completely unaware of the empire that had just crumbled in this private room. What happens now? Melissa asked. Now, Victoria said, we get you home. You've had enough drama for one evening. Tomorrow, we'll start building your life on your own terms. As they made their way out through a private exit, avoiding the gala crowd, Melissa felt her baby kick. Strong, insistent, as if celebrating this new beginning. Behind them, Alexander Chen stood in the ballroom, watching his carefully constructed world fall apart while his mistress calculated whether there was any way to salvage her investment of time. Above them, Victoria Mitchell's name blazoned across the building in letters that suddenly felt less like decoration and more like a warning. The Mitchell family took care of their own. And they made sure everyone who forgot that fact learned it in the most painful way possible. 3 months later, Melissa stood in the nursery of her new townhouse, purchased with her own money from the divorce settlement, and rocked her daughter to sleep. Victoria Rose Mitchelton had her mother's dark eyes and what would probably be her grandmother's steel spine, based on the strength of her grip. The divorce had been finalized 2 weeks before the birth. Alexander had signed everything without a fight, knowing that resistance would cost him more than compliance. Chen Global had lost 3 of its major government contracts, the renewals mysteriously stalled in committee reviews. The company was downsizing, selling assets, fighting to survive. Natasha had moved on to her next target, a venture capitalist in Silicon Valley who apparently didn't know how to use Google. Melissa almost felt sorry for him. Almost. She's beautiful, Victoria said from the doorway. At 62, she'd cut back on her Senate schedule slightly to spend more time with her granddaughter. And stubborn. Definitely a Mitchell. Definitely, Melissa agreed, smiling down at her sleeping daughter. Her phone buzzed with a message from Rebecca. Coffee tomorrow? I have news about the nonprofit board position I mentioned. Melissa had rediscovered her own ambitions in the months since leaving Alexander, not disappearing into Alexander's shadow, but building something meaningful using the connections she'd been taught to hide. She'd joined 2 nonprofit boards, started consulting on civic engagement initiatives, and was exploring a run for city council in the next election. Being Victoria Mitchell's daughter wasn't a burden anymore. It was a legacy, a responsibility, and increasingly, a source of pride. "Mom," she said quietly, "thank you. For the gala, for standing up for me, for reminding me who I was." Victoria crossed the nursery and wrapped an arm around her daughter. "You always knew who you were, sweetheart. You just forgot for a little while. Love does that sometimes, makes us smaller than we are. But you found your way back." Through the nursery window, Melissa could see the city lights spreading out in all directions. Somewhere out there, Alexander was probably working late, trying to salvage what remained of his company. Somewhere else, Natasha was probably charming her way into someone else's life. But Melissa was here, in a home she'd chosen, holding a daughter who would grow up knowing that being a Mitchell woman meant strength, purpose, and the absolute certainty that you never, ever let anyone make you feel less than you were. The baby stirred in her arms, those dark eyes opening briefly before closing again. Melissa kissed her daughter's forehead and whispered the words her mother had whispered to her, words that Victoria's mother had spoken, words that carried the weight of 4 generations of Mitchell women who'd refused to break. "You're going to change the world, little one. And no one will ever make you forget who you are." Outside, the city hummed with possibility. And inside this quiet nursery, a new generation of Mitchell women prepared to take their place in that world, stronger, wiser, and absolutely unbreakable.